Thanks, Brittany. And there they are, my little boy and my little girl. They're burgeoning technical SEOs. And by the way, I want to thank my wife, who's an incredible woman, for enabling me to be here today. They're only 8 weeks old. So shout out to my wife. All right. Let's take a trip back to the early days when you were learning SEO, learning our craft. Grab your Ninja Turtles lunchbox. Think back to those days. What were you taught? If you were like me, you were given this picture painted for you of SEO, this Venn diagram consisting of 3 pillars: relevance, authority and trust, and website infrastructure and search engine accessibility, which in turn equated to 3 primary practices of SEO: content strategy, digital PR and link building, and quote-unquote technical SEO. Now, the problem with the things we were taught in grade school and in life in general is sometimes they're oversimplifications, they're embellishments, they're collective truths that are in reality collective falsehoods. This is not uncommon. Just to give an example of one of the things that is incorrect that we were taught in grade school, there's a story of Isaac Newton sitting under an apple tree when an apple falls from a branch above, boinks him on the head, and eureka, he came up with the theory of gravity. That never happened. He was sitting in an orchard, which I believe was on his family's estate. He was a wealthy man, and he was watching the apples fall and, inventing calculus and so forth. And he did, in that environment, come up with the theory of gravity. But there was no eureka moment with this apple falling on his head. We're taught this rule of English, I before E except after C, which is it's generally true, except there's something like 193 somewhat exceptions to the rule. The story of Benjamin Franklin flying a kite with a key attached to it, discovering electricity. Electricity was known for so many years prior to this. This experiment was actually designed to prove that lightning was in fact electrical in nature. It has nothing to do with the discovery of electricity. But it's a good story, and we tell it. I also recall this anecdote of a friend from college who was studying electrical engineering. I don't know how many people are familiar with principles of electricity and electrical design, but there's this equation, Ohm's law, I equals VR, and it's this sort of steadfast truth. And he was telling me that, for all intents and purposes, this is true until things get really complicated. There's this concept of this infinite grid of resistors in which this equation, which is more or less a law, completely falls apart. Anyway, I'm going on. SEO is no different. It's complex, and it's wrought with oversimplifications. So, take a step back. I want to look at technical SEO and how we think about it. And in my opinion, why it's a misguided definition. So this is the traditional picture of technical SEO. It has everything to do with crawling and indexing, and as a result, we're able to rank our pages. And in modern days, with the prevalence of JavaScript, JavaScript frameworks, they add in this extra layer of rendering. This is, again, just the traditional viewpoint of what technical SEO is. And don't get me wrong, this is hugely, hugely important, and I love everything about working on these sort of problems related to this. You have an e-commerce website. If you cannot crawl those pages and they don't get indexed, you're missing out on an incredible source of revenue. And websites can get quite complex. And expertise in how it all works is necessary. And it's becoming more necessary as we evolve as practitioners, as websites evolve, as the web evolves. But you can have the most technically sound website and have no traffic. It's because at the end of the day, if you do not have content, you do not have the right content, you're not going to get that traffic. And you could have all the technical SEO you want, the traditional definition of technical SEO, and not have any sales. I mean, this is the technical SEO talk, right? I'm talking about technical SEO. Why am I saying content is in some ways more important? I'm going to drill this home a little bit more. Furthermore, there's some easy ways to get technical SEO right. You have a WordPress website, you install the Yoast plugin, you're kind of most of the way there, right? And again, I'm committing my own sin of oversimplifying things, but the reality is you're gonna do kind of fine if you have great content in a WordPress installation. But my website doesn't use WordPress, right? Well, you know what? A lot of the market does. 60% of the CMS market is WordPress. 33% of all websites run on WordPress. 33% of all websites have good enough technical SEO. So again, most modern CMSs do a lot of the heavy lifting for technical SEO. The barrier to getting technical SEO good enough is in some ways much lower than getting content right. It's no wonder you start to see articles like this pop up. I don't know if anyone remembers this. This was, I think, a few years ago now. Claiborne Griffin wrote this article in Search Engine Land, title, "The Role of Technical SEO Should Play Its Makeup." And the underlying idea is not entirely wrong, but it was, of course, a very poorly worded, offensive analogy that was a bit inflammatory. But point being, technical SEO is very important. And there's a lot more to technical SEO than the technical SEO that this article is talking about. And there's more to the definition than the one you've been taught in SEO grade school. So without further ado, let's redefine technical SEO. Brittany mentioned my conference, which is coming back for its third year. It's a conference dedicated entirely to technical SEO. Our first year, we had Russ Jones, who presented yesterday an amazing presentation. I had him come and give a talk on the state of technical SEO. And in that presentation, I think we collaborated a bit on coming to the final definition. And what he came up with was this definition right here. He said, any sufficiently technical action undertaken with the intent to improve search results. Now, if that's the definition of technical SEO, that certainly broadens things. It's not necessarily just about crawling and indexing. I want to take this a step further, dive a little bit deeper, because I believe this deserves a little bit more exploration. I posit that there are actually 4 types of technical SEO. The first one, checklist technical SEO. Then there's general technical SEO, blurred responsibility technical SEO, and advanced applied technical SEO. Starting with checklist technical SEO. Checklist technical SEO is things that could be distilled down into sort of a checklist process or framework. You can sort of posit a few questions one at a time, answer yes or no, check the box. It's frankly automatable. Does this page have a canonical tag? Yes, that's great. Is that canonical tag crawlable, correctly formatted? Awesome. Is that canonical tag directed to the desired URL? Great. And so on and so forth. And there's a lot of tools that will help you handle a lot of this. You can use a crawler like Botify or Screaming Frog, and you'll get a lot of the way there. You can use I haven't even seen this before. I know Annie Cushing has a technical audit you can purchase that is essentially this. It's you ask one question at a time and answer those questions for a client, and you're doing technical SEO, doing checklist technical SEO. And essentially, it's just a lower skill version of that crawling and indexing thing that we were discussing earlier, that definition. And I don't mean to diminish it either, because it's hugely important. You do these things, and if your website is all have any issues, you're gonna see a lift. But AI is coming, the robots are coming. These things are definitely subject to automation. And if you rely entirely on this, you're in trouble. And furthermore, it's not quite equipped for the more complex situations. Which brings us to the second type of technical SEO, general technical SEO. So general technical SEO is conceptually very similar to checklist technical SEO. It's things that concern itself with crawling and indexing, except the scenarios in which you need to apply logic and your skill set are more complex. It's the higher skilled version of checklist technical SEO. And these are things like maybe finding and correcting an obscure crawler trap created by a bug in your CMS, designing a maximally crawlable taxonomy and site architecture, internal linking analysis, working on your server-side rendering design, and so forth. More difficult to automate, a little bit more in the weeds. Blurred responsibility technical SEO. Welcome to SEO, folks. Blurred responsibility. Jeez. Oftentimes in SEO, there are jobs and tasks and things that we recommend that aren't necessarily SEO tasks, right? We're talking about things like page speed, web performance optimization. You could easily pass that off to a front-end web developer or a UX guy, but oftentimes it falls to the SEO. It's kind of technical too. Internal site search. I don't know if anyone's designed an internal site search engine, but this in itself is a huge task, a huge body of knowledge. People engineer these things. Structured data. Another whole world of technical SEO that's not necessarily meant to be done by SEOs. Advanced analytics implementation, the list goes on. Which brings me to the last one, and this is where we're really going to focus most of the talk, is advanced applied technical SEO. These are things that are not necessarily do anything to do with crawling and indexing. These involve applying a technical skill set to SEO problems across the board. Just quickly rattle off a few examples. Testing for SEO purposes. Anytime there's an adoption of a new technology, having someone there that is well equipped to deal with that, understands how a crawler works, understands how it might work with that new technology, how to actually design this for your client in an optimal manner. The application of data science for SEO. Using technology like natural language processing, machine learning, and applying that to search, automation. This is the application of technical items to your SEO. And when you posit technical SEO in this way, it starts to seem that almost SEO becomes a cornerstone. It's foundational. Like all SEO can in fact be technical SEO. Okay. So now that we have our definition, you're nice and excited. You understand this new definition of technical SEO. I want to give some more practical examples. And I've listed these all on my blog. You can look at them all in one place at searchwilderness.com/Mozcons-2019. They're there for your enjoyment. Okay. Link development. Is that technical SEO? Link building? Link building? I think traditionally not, but it can be. So this is a Python script, and essentially what this does is it looks for expired domains. So you can do something like go to a niche community forum. Really into board games, one of the niche community forums, for board games is BoardGameGeek.com. I can look at a particular game on BoardGameGeek, crawl that with Screaming Frog, export the outlinks, use the script. The script does this all automatically once you have the Screaming Frog output. It distills those links to just the domain name, uses the Moz Linkscape API to extract the page authority and domain authority for each one of those domains, checks whether the HTTP status code is a 404, checks a whois API to see if that domain name is registered, and outputs the answer to you. And there's a million ways you can use this. One of the ways I'd recommend is to find those domains that were high page authority. They were high page authority for a reason. There's probably very excellent content on those. You can look at what questions were they answering, what sort of content were they producing, try to replicate the intent there, and then conduct outreach. But getting to those content ideas was a technical process. And again, I ran this, found cardboardcrusader.com was expired. Some dude selling it for $1,800. I'm not paying $1,800. But I looked at the content, I put it in the Wayback Machine. I'm starting to build out a content strategy. Technical SEO. On-page SEO. Not traditionally technical SEO. That's writing. Here's another Python script. And by the way, if you guys are not familiar with Python, you do need to download the Python scripting language. You can get that on python.org. If you're on Windows, I kind of recommend using the Anacondas distribution. Just Google Python Anacondas, and you'll have to install the relevant libraries. Back to this example. This is using the Google Natural Language API to extract entities to enhance your content. So you need to, in the Google Developer console, you need to enable the natural language processing API. It's free up to a certain number of queries. I forget how many exactly, and then it's like a nominal charge after that. You can input SERP data. For the purpose of this script, we're just using a CSV. So it's like I imported like the first 3 pages of results. I would recommend actually using this with a rank tracking API. If you use stat, you can use the stat API, whatever you like. You download all the pages that are ranking. So those top 30 results, download all the content of those pages, reduce that content to just the text. So get rid of all the code, remove all the boilerplate content. So no navigation menus, no footer, just the real content that matters. And then you simply put this into the Google Natural Language API, and it's going to extract entities as Google determines the entities to exist. Then we can count the frequency of those entities across all the various documents. We'll pull out that salience score, and we can aggregate those metrics. And end of the day, we'll get a list of keywords. I think this term was Martin guitars. And we can sort of use that to optimize content for Martin guitars to make sure that we have an optimal breadth of coverage, that we've improved the relevance for that underlying topic or term. Technical SEO. On-page SEO is technical SEO. Content ideation. Oh my God, I love applying content ideation in technical SEO. Big Redditor, and I think Reddit's an invaluable source of information for content ideation. Ross did a fantastic talk where he discussed some of this. You can use this script to help out with some of that. So you go into the script, you log in with your Reddit credentials, you specify an output, you can choose either to isolate it to specific subreddits, specific communities, or you can look at the entirety of Reddit. You put in one term or a series of terms. I like to put in things like how to, or how can I, where can I, things that are questions that people wanted answered on Reddit. Or you could just put in whatever the topic is that you're looking to cover. And you're just going to get a long list of threads on Reddit, sorted by upvotes, sorted by comments, and you can start to analyze that afterwards. Look at an actual application. I run a board game blog now, but I used to run a horror movie blog. And when I was looking to develop content originally for my horror movie blog, I used this tool. And this is sort of an interesting, I think this is an interesting concept. So horror movie fans are a unique breed. They're hardcore enthusiasts, and what they like isn't what the general populace necessarily likes. So if you look at search volume, that's a metric that reflects what the general populace likes. So I was deciding which horror movie director to write about. So if this is just sorted by horror movie director. And if you look at this, one of the main directors, horror movie directors I should have written about was Alfred Hitchcock, popular director. Let's look at metrics from Reddit. So this is sorted by upvotes and comments. Alfred Hitchcock's nowhere to be found. It's because within my own niche community, Alfred Hitchcock wasn't the guy to write about. They don't care about Alfred Hitchcock. Honestly, you're better striking a balance between search volume and interest from Reddit. George Romero is the way to go. It's technical SEO. Do another example, just because content ideation is fun. YouTube, tons of text content hidden behind videos. So this tool, which again, it's a Python script you can use freely. You input a whole YouTube playlist. I do an example in a minute where I put in all of Mozcon 2016. There's a free playlist of all the videos from Mozcon 2016. Downloads every auto-generated transcription in English, does some basic frequency analysis on that text, and we get some interesting insights. Mozcon 2016 was the year of content and friends. Technical SEO. Automation. Automation's great. Some real advantages to automating things. Clearly, it frees up time that you could spend on strategy and other things that you can't automate as easily. Also helps with data consistency. If you're doing like a redundant task over and over, it's subject to error. But if you have the robot do it in a very strict way, computer, a program, you're gonna get more consistency out of that task. Here's an automation example. So Wayback Machine, love Wayback Machine. They have a series of APIs. One of them will list every single URL for a domain name. So you put in the domain name into the Wayback Machine. It will spit out a list of historic URLs that ever existed, that it ever was able to find on the Wayback Machine. It will extract the text. It'll get rid of the crofts. It'll get rid of the navigation, just the main text. And then you can compare the old content to the existing content using text analysis. So essentially, what you get is a process of automating 301 redirect mapping. Right, so this example, I literally searched law firm redesign to see someone who messed it up. Not surprising, like within like the first 10 results, there was like a lot of errors. So I hope no one works for this law firm. Or if you do, come see me. So essentially, you get a list of old URLs mapped to a list of new URLs and a similarity score. You assume that the highest scoring URL is likely the correct fit. It's technical SEO. Writing meta descriptions. It's tedious. Sometimes you can't write a meta description for every page on an e-commerce website with 10 million URLs. What do you do? Well, I don't suggest completely automating it, although there are some people in this industry that are definitely working on this problem and doing a great job. So you input a list of URLs into a text file. You specify an output. You run it through various text summarization algorithms. So you're getting actually like a summary rather than a true meta description, and you're using that summary as a proxy for a meta description. You're summarizing what that page is about, and rather than leaving it to Google to figure that out. Output puts it to a CSV, and then you have to do some manual work. So this is sort of like a semi-automated approach. You just sort of like scan and see like which would be the best algorithm for this one, because sometimes they produce really junk results. Sometimes one's better than the other in a certain instance. And at least you have a starting place. You're not writing a meta description completely from scratch. And you put this into a tool like my pixel width checker, which is really great for bulk writing of titles and meta descriptions. And you do a lot of that work for you. Technical SEO. Keyword research. So technical. Big fan of audience-based research when you're doing keyword research. It's otherwise a pretty manual process. So to really understand your audience and write content for that audience and make sure it's a good fit for that audience. I work for a big agency. We have pretty expensive tools. One of them is Hitwise Audience View. Pretty cool tool. It has all sorts of audience data associated with keywords and websites, and you can sort of do these across big keyword profiles, but it's really hard to do them one at a time. And I think that's really important when you're doing keyword research. So essentially, this does some sort of browser simulation. This script's really janky, but it does the job. And it pulls out all sorts of psychographic and demographic data for each and every one of those keywords. So you can make sure that when you write content, it aligns properly to that audience. It's technical SEO. Reporting, automation, dashboards. If there's one thing you're going to automate, I recommend working towards automated reporting. It is such a time suck. And of course, you're going to have to sit with a client and go through it a bit, but at least you're not putting together a giant Excel dashboard for them to have to go through. And in order to do this, one of the things you need to do is sort of create a data warehouse. So you need to start pulling in analytics data, Search Console data, anything that may be relevant. This could all be done through API. In this instance, this is using Search Console. It dumps it all to a SQL database, and then that can be imported into a dashboarding software like Tableau Data Studio, Power BI, whatever you like to use. And then you make pretty charts. It's technical SEO. Last example. And my previous examples were heavy coding examples. And I don't want people to think that this is restricted to people that code. There's a lot of ways where that technical acumen can be applied in other ways. Testing is one of them, hugely important to the industry today. There's a use of machine learning algorithms. Queries are varying wildly. Ranking is much harder to predict. So testing is essential. So again, far too often SEOs rely on the status quo, best practices that end up being wrong. I've seen some of the biggest lifts from conducting tests, and experimentation opposed to, like say, split testing could really help us understand how the search engines work. How can you help do this? You can work with engineers, product managers to write testing specs, adhering to the scientific method. You can measure the before and after in an attempt to isolate anomalies. That's more on the measurement side of things. This is a split testing example. We have a control group where everything stays the same, and then a series of variants, in which case we alter a little aspect of it. Etsy wrote a great article about how to do this conceptually using causal impact library in R. This is using a Python port. Very, very simple implementation, but it essentially tries to isolate data anomalies, things like seasonality that might affect a test like this and be able to determine causality. The other type of testing I mentioned is sort of experiments. This was an example of a similar test I ran for one of my clients that was trying to understand how their navigation would function. So we, instead of forcing them to do a live test on their website, we recreated the key aspects of what they were trying to do on a separate domain name and observed how Google responded to it. It's technical SEO. And I've mentioned this already. So coding, a lot of these examples relied on coding. And it's not the only way to handle, to contribute to technical SEO, but it is important, and I recommend that people learn the fundamentals of coding. It's going to help you in other ways, even if you're not, designing data programs or anything. You'll be able to work better with developers in the future, speaking their language, and you'll be better at solving crawling and indexing problems, to be honest. And furthermore, it's my twins again. Children are learning how to code in grade school. It's becoming a part of basic literacy. And eventually, these children are going to enter the workforce, and they're going to be gunning for your jobs. So not to paint such a grim picture, but I recommend learning. These are examples of general technical SEO that would make use of coding. Okay, I'm way over time. This might be sort of a daunting thing to learn about coding, which is why I recommend investing in technical SEOs rather than technical SEO itself. They are the glue that holds this together, and often talent is your bottleneck. But fear not, if you don't know how to code, I don't want you to stress. I want to tell you how to think about this. Should you hire engineers, data scientists, analysts? Can your existing SEO staff learn these things? How to think about hiring technical SEOs. You want to think about hiring people that are adept at utilizing their technical aptitude and skills to aid, improve, and enhance both technical and non-technical SEO tasks. This is really like a mode of thinking more than anything. I would look for skills similar to those of what I consider good engineers. People that aren't purely about the code, people that have a strong ability to problem solve, think critically, the ability to take a complex subject and communicate that well to others who may not understand it. A creative mind. And if you need to start from square one and learn how to code, maybe you have a little bit of experience in the past coding, and it was like Visual Basic or a less common programming language today. Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter which programming language you use. It's the logic, the underlying logic. It's pretty transferable. But if you need to pick a language today, there's sort of like two paths you can pick. There's the data analysis path, which I recommend Python. It's a lot of data numbers, libraries that are very helpful. If you're going down the web development path, JavaScript's the way to go. It's a very robust language, applicable in many ways. And there's a lot of resources to learn how to use them. I recommend having a practical goal to work towards, although there's sort of a divergent pedagogy for this. Some people think you should learn all the underlying theory first. I've always been a fan of jumping into the ocean, just having a job in mind that I want to solve and trying to do it. Leverage online tutorials, MOOCs, Code Academy. Don't be afraid to look at examples, steal little snippets from GitHub and Stack Overflow. And you don't have to do everything yourself. If you have the resources, if you have an engineering team, and you understand that logic behind what you're actually trying to accomplish, look for help. So, to go back to our original discussion on the pillars of technical SEO, I insinuated that content might be even more important than technical SEO. Is it? Nor is when I say technical SEO is more important than content or link buildings, really. It's all a part of this one crazy Venn diagram. Except the Venn diagram can look a little bit different. You can put technical SEO as a circle that encompasses both of those. Technical SEO could be at the center of all of it. You can elevate your work that is otherwise creative, your content strategy, the work you're already doing. You can elevate the work your link builders are doing, the content development. Start thinking about technical SEO a little differently. Let technical SEO be your glue. They help. Let technical SEOs be your glue. They help everyone. Thank you.